Welcome to Season 2 of Hitmakers. In this season, we're going to track how culture moves margins, multiples, and market cap. Today, we are looking at moments when cultural capital turns into financial capital. We break down why Labubu is still printing money, long after most thought the hype had peaked. Why Hailey Bieber Rhode became $600 million brand almost overnight. And why bootleg Gucci is a hotter business than Gucci itself.
Welcome, everyone. How are you doing today, Anna?
I'm doing great. Shall we introduce ourselves for a second? I'm Anna Angelic.
I'm Lee Maschmeyer.
And this is long time in the making, and it's finally happening, and I cannot be more delighted. So for those who don't remember me from season 1 or don't know me, I work as a brand executive, formerly chief brand officer at Banana Republic and NS3, and currently consulting, author of 2 books, The Business of Aspiration and Hitmakers, writing a newsletter, Sociology of Business. Leland, your turn.
Leland Maschmeyer. I have done many things, but I'm probably most famous for being one of the co-founders of the consultancy Collins, working with a lot of companies from a design perspective on increasing the value of their company. For many years was the chief brand officer of Chobani, yes, the yogurt company that we helped expand into being much more than a yogurt company, but also been an investor, worked with a lot of PE firms, but always in the space of using design as a strategic method for improving the value of a business and transforming businesses.
Love that. So what have you been up to last week?
Well, I have 2 kids, so it's always just about the kids and moving them from A to B and trying to get clothes on them and toothbrushes in their mouth. That's been the main
heard
thing.
Enough. I've been in Paris and Milan.
Actually, I did do one cool thing. I was in Bhutan for 10 days.
Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
going to, that's why we're recording this so late, because we were going to a bunch of monasteries up there, had a very lovely audience with the king of Bhutan, and got to learn about a new city that they're building, which integrates Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies into the model of the city. And it's a whole mindfulness city, and it's really fascinating listening to the king talk about it and stuff, and got to ask him a bunch of questions about it and kind of interrogate the thinking and the approach to it. Because I mean, like, how often do you get to design a city?
That's wild. Maybe we'll leave that for a next episode. On my end, there were fashion weeks. So that's what brought me there. And I'm really glad that we're going to talk about some of these topics later. But I had the opportunity to stop by Gucci flagship at Via Monte Napoleone and see Gucci archetypes, which I really love as the new model of brand building, because what Dana has done basically broke down the code in brand code into 37 archetypes. And what he is doing is basically using mood and the vibe to sell products and saying, hey, there is not one way that Gucci is getting sold. There are 37 ways. And we're using the Italianness of this brand and breaking it down in different archetypes, the way you can wear it, and which is very smart and modern way of doing it. It's not telling you need to wear it like that. It's like, what are you in the mood for today?
So I find that so interesting because, like, obviously so much about business is about a singular idea that you consistently and efficiently execute on. Even what Alessandro was doing at Gucci before had a very singular aesthetic to it and this very singular world building. I mean, it modified a lot and had a lot of kitsch and a lot of play to it. So there was always something new in there. But man, 37 archetypes is a lot to manage. I wonder why he thought 37 and not like 32, for example.
Honestly, when you go in and I ask store associates, I was like, what's selling? And they're like, VIP selling La Bomba, sold like immediately, which is like fur. And I'm like, who bought this golden thing? And they were like, there was a Chinese customer in private sale. And then the denim is selling really well. So they knew. And then I got into conversation. And obviously them being Italians, they're like, we're seeing this Renaissance in fashion. Of course, they're going to say Renaissance. They're Italians. But it's sort of nice to see people being excited about creativity again, which I guess gets us to creativity plus finance equals cultural capital becoming business capital and market moves. So what's been happening in the market this week?
We're going to have this segment that we call Market Moves. We're going to do it with every episode. And it's really just kind of a check-in on tracking how culture is moving in the markets. And so a lot of stuff has been happening over the summer. So we're just going to get right into it and kind of give you an overview of some of the stuff that we thought was meaningful and worth noting from the summer. Skims raised new funding in July at a $4 billion valuation, up from $3.2 billion just last year. The boost wasn't just from sales, it was cultural dominance. Its new men's line launched with a campaign starring Nick Bosa, Neymar, and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, turning sex appeal in sports casting into viral fuel. Kim Kardashian built a fashion brand and priced it like a media company. In August, NVIDIA quietly hired its first ever global community manager, a signal that even the world's most valuable semiconductor company sees brand affinity as a strategic moat. For a company that rarely speaks outside earnings calls, it's a major cultural shift. GPUs are now consumer objects, not just components. In September, Balenciaga and Momo launched a capsule collection featuring archival imagery and logos, a collision of cultural institutions and commercial fashion. It's part of a broader strategy turning museum cachet into streetwear clout and reframing heritage as hype.
Can I just jump in? Balenciaga also has T-shirts, and this is like them as parting gift, question mark, to the brand spring-summer collection saying luxury, priced at $795. I love Paris, Britney Spears, and then ripped tights for $7,000. That's his parting gift for Pierpaolo Piccoli. Figure out how you're going to sell this. Go on.
Hey, it's a Veblen good. That's all it is. Veblen good.
Luxury.
Social capital, baby. Layering on social capital to drive financial capital.
That's cultural and a fashion design of this. He's like so totally effing with shit. Fashion designer. Okay, and Pierpaolo, sell this motherfucker. Go on.
It works. All right.
You see if that doesn't say.
Okay, LVMH is always doing something, but recently it deepened its investment in Japan through artisan partnerships and fashion exhibitions, which is part of a strategy to hedge tourism volatility by betting on cultural permanence. LA Galaxy dropped a limited edition capsule with cult streetwear brand Ryoko Rain. It's the latest example of a sports team moving beyond ticket sales into high-margin cultural merchandise. As match day revenues plateau, clubs are repositioning as lifestyle platforms, with apparel now driving a growing share of both revenue and ROI on fan engagement. And finally, after years of confused brand identity, Burberry is finally embracing its British roots, which just seems so obvious, but they're finally doing it. Burberry leaned hard into Britishness with its Always Burberry Weather campaign and a British music subculture-inspired runway show featuring nods to Oasis, Bowie, and Sting. The cultural collaboration appears to be working. Q1 losses were less severe than forecast, signaling early traction in the brand's turnaround under CEO Joshua Schulman. So Anna, that is just a small grouping of stuff that's happened, but a lot of exciting stuff going on.
Love the summary. I just want to kind of like stay with Burberry for a second, because that's a brand that I have a long history with since I've been working at Create Group which is an agency that built websites for luxury brands more than 10 years ago. We did Art of the Trench, so there is nothing more British than, like, maybe the Queen or now the King is more British than Burberry. And it was like really strange to watch a brand that's so British struggle with its identity, and it was fantastic. It is fantastic to see it finally embrace it and sort of find its way. And like in on a macro level, just when Britain is, I don't want to say struggling with its identity, but maybe that's what British need. Maybe they need a reminder what they are all about, you know? Maybe they just need, like, I think they need a little bit of encouragement.
Well, I mean, isn't that always the case? Like when things go to shit, you try to find like who you actually are in the midst of all the like the fucked upness and like try to recenter on that. I mean, I said the whole Burberry thing was like so obvious that it's British. And I think it's just one of those things that it's like, it's so obvious that you overlook it and it just seems too easy of an answer. But my God, like, what a great history, what a great canon to pull from and reinterpret and remix at the heart of your brand. There is no other brand in the world that can do that except Burberry. And just for years, they just weren't focused on it because they felt they had to chase some other stuff.
Totally. And not only that, the history of the trench, the way that the trench as the product, speaking of product-led branding, is the way the trench was made. It was truly innovative. And it was not possible to make that like how the material was actually covered to be waterproof. That was a true innovation 100 years ago or whatever, more than that, how it was made, and only that horrible tragedy could have inspired it. So going back to 2025 and the past year under Joshua Schulman, the results are there. Decline in sales is not as severe as before. They have clearly refocused their product focus on trenches. And what they have also been doing is, again, brand identity clearly on Britishness, and then again, refocus on the product strategy and the brand strategy are in sync, which is very clear in Daniel Lee's latest show, fashion show at the London Fashion Week, where he really leaned into, again, the British, one of the greatest exports is its music. And he leaned in the music subcultures, Oasis, David Bowie, the Queen, and so on, and had the codes of those music subcultures like Oasis, parka with fur, David Bowie, like suede suit, and so on, to kind of to inform his visual language for the latest collection. So those guys who are familiar with my work and those who are not, I use cultural programming a lot to say, what is the narrative of brands in culture? How they use subcultures and their sort of behaviors and tastes and codes and aesthetics to partner with the subculture in a way to generate a new cultural story. An example is really that Burberry is using the language of a music subculture to create something new, both in terms of product and in terms of their cultural program, visible in what they have done last summer when they went to Glastonbury and other famous British music festivals, and what they did in their brand activations across British Isles, and what they're doing now in terms of their short and longer form content with Olivia Colman, which is another British treasure. So they're almost hitting all the marks. We have the content, we have the right personalities, we have the right food, we have the right language that we are using. So the consistency and the tightness of that program and the cultural products that they're using within it, the collaborations, the merge, the content, the experiences, the events, they're hitting all the marks. I have to say, I'm impressed. I'm very curious what they're gonna do next year.
And I mean, I think that's really well said. Like I was thinking of a conversation I had, I think at this point, like 2 weeks ago. So I basically spent the better part of a full day with the CMO of a major tech company, like one of the largest in the world. And our entire conversation was around how a company can be widely known, trusted, score high on all the traditional brand metrics, but be completely invisible in culture. And this was something that completely baffled him. And it was not like the company needed to be visible in culture in order to drive business. The business was fantastic, but it was a confounding challenge of like, how can one be true and the other not true? And a big part of what you just said is the idea of focusing on those subcultures, focusing on not just targeting and marketing at them, but contributing to them, almost participating in a conversation and a bunch of inside jokes, a bunch of inside code cues and stuff like that. and having sort of like this ongoing drip of little things that you do. No real different than you would do with like a campaign where it's like different levels of activations or different levels of communications, but you do it through the lens of cultural product. But this idea of focusing on smaller groups, creating sort of like cultural products for them, interesting activations that sort of like advance that subgroup's narrative or enriches the storytelling within that group, like sort of like British music culture, for example, was an entirely new concept to him. And he was really fascinated. We've sort of continued the conversation about it since then. But in this algorithmically driven world of media, where community, where mimetic content, mimetic artifacts and stuff like that are really driving most of the conversations in culture, this is like a very core thing. And it would be a big cultural shift within the organization of this tech company to start doing that. But I imagine even within Burberry, it would be a big shift. But the point that I want to make here really is, the point that I made with him was, as a tech company, as a titan of tech, he actually needed to look at fashion brands and what fashion brands were doing in this space, because fashion brands rise or fall based on their ability to do this, which means they are the leading R&D labs of how to engage with culture. And from an outside, it can look frivolous and it can look like, oh, these are just stunty things. But if you're really in it and you're really paying attention to it, it is thoughtful, it is intentional, there are clear mechanics to it, there are clear strategies behind it. And I think like a lot of people who want to create cultural resonance and relevance for their companies and their products can learn a lot from what the Burberrys of the world are doing, particularly Burberry, because they are leading that changeover from the way they used to do stuff to something that's actually working and resonating in culture.
I love that you said that. Why do you think that I'm interested in fashion? I have a PhD, for the love of God, in sociology. So, I was always interested in brands that have cultural influence. Fashion has outsized cultural influence regarding their budgets, the size of their companies, and how innovative they are in all other regards, except their cultural influence. So, yes, thank you for saying that. And the other thing that is important, what you said, music culture, it's music cultures. And that's why it's not just David Bowie or Oasis or Queen or Nick Cave or others. It's all of them, and using different codes. So it's parka from one, skin, leopard skin from another, and snake skin from third, and really narrow the Beatles from the fourth. And going back to where we started is the archetypes. There is no anymore a mass consumer. They're just all those different micro consumers. And that is really important even when you're buying tech. People are buying based on mood, based on different needs, and based on different behaviors. And it's not just psychographics. People make a mistake. It's demographics plus. You don't figure out demographics and then psychographics. You can't separate the two anymore.
Well, you're hitting on something that we'll get into in later episodes, but it's effectively a portfolio approach. So whether Gucci is with the 37 archetypes or Burberry talking to different British subcultures within the thing, it's never about one thing. It's never one monolithic approach. Given the fragmentation of culture, given the fragmentation of media and community and just different types and levels of conversations, companies have to run a portfolio approach, very similar to like an investment firm on this. And because you never know what's going to hit. And so very similar to a portfolio approach, you put a little money in a lot of different places as investments. When you start seeing a return on it, you shift some of that capital to continue investing where you got traction in a particular subculture or community and so on. But anyway, we'll get into all that in other episodes.
Absolutely. And that's exactly first of all, portfolio of audiences, but also portfolio of cultural products. And I do think that it's relevant what Burberry is doing, not putting all their eggs in one proverbial basket with just a campaign, but doing a lot of things. And I don't know if it's again, maybe we're projecting too much intention, but let's go to Ralph Lauren. They've been doing amazing recently.
Yeah.
They had their earnings call 3 weeks ago. And I mean, I know that they changed their annual outlook because their Q1 results have been so amazing. They're doing especially well in Asia where no one else is doing well. Everyone, or luxury and premium brands are complaining about the headwinds. Burberry is doing amazing. So again, it's not nothing that they've done well in the past couple of years, although all respect and all credit goes to the new CEO. It's what Ralph has been doing for the past, 50 years, which he understood. You don't build a brand by doing just one thing, by just doing fashion. You build a world. You build a universe that has many doors into a brand. So he has fashion, he has Purple Label, he has Polo, he has main collection, he has furniture, bedding, restaurant. He has Double RL, which is a completely different aesthetic. So
I think he had paint for a while. Like you could buy Ralph Lauren paint.
You name it. So that's basically like, there is nothing that it's not, like that is not. But the point is, there is that consistency in the portfolio. It's a galaxy model, and you have all those different, it's a gravity of one strong point of view, and you can basically add whatever you want that fits into that galaxy and into that world. And like, he has a cafe now, and I was in Madison Avenue, and it's crowded. Why is it crowded? Why are people buying Ralph Lauren coffee? Because they want part of that lifestyle. And how did that guy achieve American aristocracy, which is a complete oxymoron in itself? The whole point of America is not to have aristocracy. He sold us Great Gatsby aristocracy. He sold it as the Wild West, two aesthetics, East Coast, West Coast, under the same brand. It's genius. So no wonder, like, why is he doing so well? Because the portfolio approach of completely the product pyramid is complete. And image and merchandising. Go ahead.
So I think the thing about Ralph Lauren, which is really interesting, is you could kind of look at it and say, well, they're actually just benefiting from a fashion cycle right now. Streetwear dominated everything for a long time. Even Ralph Lauren tried to do streetwear for a bit. And really, we're just coming back to preppy. It's part of the zeitgeist and sort of the rise of conservatism and stuff in the United States and things like that. But when you actually like unpack it and really look at the mechanics of what they're doing something fundamentally different than just riding a fashion cycle. I mean, the fact that they are reselling vintage pieces at like a 5 times markup rate, which is like right now for them is about 7% of that total revenue. And it's like growing 100% annually. So people are reaching for more than just preppy fashion with Ralph Lauren. There's more of a story there. There's more of a new kind of value there. And I think this is something that you and I have talked a lot about, which is lots of times people end up talking about a product value from a utility or functional perspective, or even a monetary perspective. Like it's, a high quality good at a low price. But there's all sorts of different types of value. There's social value, there's cultural value, there is emotional value, and so on. And when you layer these things on top of a product, it increases the willingness to pay of the consumer because they see greater value. And I think that's like a really important concept in all of this for like listeners to know, which is consumers aren't price conscious as much as they're value conscious. They're not going to pay more for something that doesn't seem like it has a lot of value. And I think what Ralph Lauren has done over the decades so well. And I mean, they are really among the best at it, despite having, financial periods of up and downs, is they have romanticized a fake but idealized vision of aristocratic life in the United States. And I would actually argue that Ralph Lauren has done as much for the mythos of American identity as someone like Norm Clausen, who's a photographer for the Marlboro Man campaign, did for the American West. You take sort of a verisimilitude of a partial truth and you elevate it, you romanticize it, you idealize it. Like just in the example of Norm Clausen in the West prior to Norm Clausen and his photography for the Marlboro Man campaign was really just cowboys and Indians, as they would say back in the day. It was a wild, wild west of these different groups fighting each other. But when Norm came in and started romanticizing the cowboy and really spent time with these people, understanding it, trying to figure out how to tell a story of those cowboys and capture the light, capture the color, the art direction, he created some of the most beautiful photography of the American West, but it wasn't documentary. It was an elevated aesthetic that is distinctly Norm Clausen, and has since then become sort of the archetypal image of our romanticized idea of the West, whether it's Montana or Nevada or Utah or whatever it is. And I would argue like Ralph Lauren did the exact same thing for sort of American aristocratic culture, that in a meritocracy of the United States where we're all aspiring to be better and have more and achieve more, he kind of painted the picture of what the top of the ladder looked like better than anyone else and romanticized it, but through the products made it accessible to everyone so that you could get a little piece of it when you went to a cafe. If you wanted your home to feel like it, you could paint it in Ralph Lauren paint, or you could wear the clothes regardless if you were going to a black tie ball or going to, you know, hang out with chaps and stuff like that and be more casual and stuff. But it was this idea that he kept harvesting different products from and then commercializing it. And that kind of cultural value, that symbolic value that was baked into the product is not something you just, you know, have on day one. That is decades and decades of curating a story, which he always did. I read stories about how Ralph would be on photo shoots and he would literally, like, in his mind come up with stories about the models in the portrait of like why they were there, what they were doing, their relationship with each other. And in many cases, it comes through the photography and just makes it much more emotional than just a straight photo shoot of a beautiful person wearing the clothes.
Always. And I'm really glad you brought all of that up, especially the aesthetic, because I think it's not about trend cycles and all of it, never. And with Ralph is always timelessness. And if you, there is a video that I saw this morning when he says, oh, in Europe, you have people who drive cars that are 10, 15 years old. And here in America, you have like, oh, the car is 2 years old and the neighbors are going to be like, oh, that's an old car. You need a new car after 2 years. Mm-hmm. So there is that kind of consumerism that you always need to replace. And there is like this idea that you have like maybe a corduroy suit or a tweed suit with like suede patches. So and then that has that heritage and that has that story. So the story in products themselves and the story in his advertising. And his advertising looks the same 50 years ago and now. When you look what he shot at Spelman College a month ago, it's recognizably Ralph Lauren. The vibe, the atmosphere, the mood, even the models, the same.
I want you to dig into that in a moment on the Spelman College thing, because the story of how they did their research of, even though it looked distinctively Ralph Lauren, they did their research as to what the models were wearing, where they were showing up. So it was deeply authentic, and it wasn't just a shoot. It was like there was a real heritage and if you knew the heritage in the photography.
Absolutely. And you cannot, as someone who directed shoots, you cannot have that sort of photography, that dimension, if you don't have that story. For Banana, what you've seen, what you reacted so well, was because there was, who are those people? Where are they going? What imagined world are they inhabiting? If we didn't have so many props, what the style was not there, if we didn't have such a considered narrative, it wouldn't have looked like that. Like that is the story that has to come through the photographer, the setting. You can't just put a bunch of people together. You need to have that research. And I literally killed myself sort of to build that world. And it did come through. And I'm glad it did, because there is a lot of work that goes into building a narrative world. But what I wanted to say, why is that aesthetic so timeless? Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to do a shout out to you that, like, for anyone who's listening who hasn't seen Anna's work on revamping Banana Republic and taking it back to its luxury safari days, you absolutely should. I remember when it came out, and I actually didn't know you were behind it. I saw it and I was like, oh, thank God they finally did this. This is so right. This looks so good. And then I found out you were behind it and I was like, oh, this makes complete sense now. But I loved it. And so, like, you know, people should totally look it up, because it is exactly where Banana Republic should be.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you. And then just going back to that aesthetic, and enduring power of Ralph Lauren is that aesthetic was interpreted. So that is not one crappy monolithic aesthetic. It was taken in Japan and preserved and riffed off. It was taken to Europe and ripped off and worn differently, upturned colors, and so on. And here it was if you can change it and reform it and make it your own and hip hop and rap and so appropriate it, that's what ensures your ability. And you and I are going to talk a lot about it because collaborations are a way to ensure brand durability and to kind of take what I said Demna has done, to take DNA and disperse that DNA. And that is what that aesthetic is. It doesn't matter if prep comes and goes, because that prep is not the same prep that was 50 years ago, but it's still the DNA, the source code is the same, but it has very different interpretations. So it's like evolution it's going to last forever because through the combination. And I think that's super important. When you have aesthetic, you need to open it up, because closed aesthetic is dead aesthetic.
Well, so I think, again, Ralph Lauren's a really good example here, because when they were, let's call it in the trough of their financial performance because of the sort of the dominance of streetwear, they found their way into the streetwear conversation and created a whole line using their preppiness within the context of streetwear, sort of like predating ALD and what he's been doing with that line. But the from everything that I remember, actually the Ralph Lauren kind of streetwear approach was really well received from a fashion standpoint, from an insider standpoint. I don't think it sold that well, but it was a really good example of what you're talking about how they opened up their preppy aesthetics and began blending it with other stuff to keep it relevant, but still timeless and integrous to the Ralph Lauren brand.
That's why you have modern prep, and that's like you have rowing blazers and ALD, and that's why you had 1990s Kanye wearing. I know I'm not supposed to say Kanye, but you have all those different ways in, and it's when you become a source code, you're immortal.
Well, so totally, and I mean, I think I love that phrase, source code. When culturally, because I think so many times people look at culture like ripples on an ocean. I'm going to use a really kind of poetic metaphor for a second. There's just a lot of activity and you just pay attention to the individual ripples. But there are some brands who actually say, why are the ripples happening? And they understand the sort of movements underneath the ripples that create the waves. And they say, that's what we're going to align to and understand. We're not going to pay attention to all the ripples. And so when you understand that source code of a culture, what are its codes and cues, what are its ambitions, who are its gatekeepers, what are the canons, all of that type of stuff, then you have a position from which to create, remix, and constantly reinvent while maintaining a through line in everything that you're doing. And Ralph Lauren has really been the one fashion brand to really do that so well. And in times when they've been less creative in those reinterpretations, they've been sort of knocked as being sort of stuck in the past and kind of regurgitating. But they understood the source code that they were working with, and they stuck to it. Like this next point that I'll make up, we'll probably get into in like other episodes, but this is exactly what I did at Chobani. When I joined Chobani, I said, we're going to figure out what the categorical source code is for wellness culture. And that's what we did. And we invented a whole visual language around it, as you would say, an aesthetic and iconic aesthetic and stuff. And it had since gone on to become an aesthetic that was broadly adopted by sort of global wellness culture. There was just one brand after the other. Could have been, doesn't matter the category. It was like across categories that was just copying the DNA of the source code that we had interpreted for Chobani. But exactly what you said, and with like Ralph Lauren and even Banana Republic, you knew the code to go back to. Every time you had to do something different as a business or move a product into a new market opportunity, you had that source code DNA that you could go back to and say, okay, now how do we take this and reinterpret it for this opportunity to expand, extend, or refresh the brand? And so it's a really, really powerful thing when you have it. It's hard to get because you need some like nuance and sensitivity to culture in doing it. But once you have it, it is a powerful equity, a powerful generator of value and consistency in the company.
It is, and I want us to go back to that, and I know we planned that because in sort of my portfolio of cultural products, aesthetics is brand codes and aesthetics are two of the important ones. And I also want to say that I also call that what is the intention when the founders create the brand. What was that? They do create that source code. What is their intention? Why did they think that this brand was needed in culture? That was that starting of a dialogue with culture. And of course, culture changes and the dialogue is going to change. But what the brand story, what the role of branding culture is, has to sort of morph, but the intention needs to be the same.
So let's use this as a jumping off point to move into our next segment in the deep dive, which is another brand that seems to keep going despite seemingly having run out of steam. It keeps finding new ways to reinterpret itself, and that's Labubu. So
those little furry guys, they're not furry, and they're now mini.
So it's been a breakout year for Labubu, the mischievous snaggletooth creature created by Hong Kong artist Kei Sing Lung and produced by Pop Mart. Once a niche designer toy, Labubu has become one of Asia's most coveted cultural collectibles, with limited drops sparking frenzy, streetwear collabs, and now a planned theme park attraction in mainland China, which is like insane to think about. The hype has helped drive Pop Mart's stock up over 40% this year, which outperforms legacy toy giants like Mattel and Hasbro, whose shares have remained largely flat over the same period. Labubu is now Pop Mart's most valuable IP to date. So Anna, why is Labubu still working? Why is it still at the center of global culture?
Honestly, if I answer this question, that's going to ruin my street cred. Because Labubu in my crowd is considered completely uncool. That said, hey, it was really peak last spring. That again, and clearly they kind of wisened up. They didn't file copyright protection or trademark protection until 2024, because before that it was free. There was Lafufu. There was they figured out there is something here in 2024, the reverse hockey stick was kind of going up. And they quickly did trademark protection and look at them now. So now they figured out okay, IP is there and masses are coming. So once the cool kids are I don't want to be associated with this, everyone else comes in, which is where the money is. Let's be real.
It's the exploitation phase of any capital cycle.
Exactly. And, the exploitation phase, as we know, can go 50 years, 100 years. Look at Hello Kitty and look at Disney, I mean, they change laws, exploitation phases, and, copyright laws. So, again, it's going to mean something else once it becomes part of culture. Because at the beginning, it was oh, if you know, you know. I mean, when I spoke in Paris with a stylist, he said, oh, but my friend, another stylist who works in Asia, he told me this is going to be a thing 6 months prior. So it's kind of the mood was getting set up for this to kind of explode. And those in the know who are dressing as celebrities, they were telling Rihanna, they were telling Lisa, hey, pay attention, this is going to be big. You should wear this is cool, So that was kind of from status symbol, oh, you have this because no one else here, to me wanting to have something that's going to position me as cool to something that means a ticket to something else. Oh, now I have a whole collection, or I have a mini one, or I'm going to go to theme park, or I have, I don't know, someone, a rare one, or I have access to cartoons, or there is a movie, now we're having the entire empire. So it means something completely different than before.
Well, I feel though, right now, Labubu is creating financial value for Pop Mart mainly off an aesthetics play, where and a limited edition or collab play, which are all effective. But I feel and correct me if you see it a little differently, but I keep feeling they're sort of reinterpreting the look of Labubu or trying to do these really limited edition things to get these quick bumps of interest. But I feel that's going to burn out after a little while unless they add in.
Yes.
Yeah, no, but I think they need to start adding in a narrative layer to it. Maybe they'll do that with the theme park
now
or with
it's
content.
Awareness. Now they're in a mess phase. So now they're in a Hello Kitty phase. Now it's time to start making cartoons, movies, theme parks.
Yeah, exactly.
They're in
That's
a
my whole
Disney
point.
phase. Like now
they need-
there is
they
no
need
more
narrative.
cultural exactly. There is no more cultural capital.
Yeah.
Now we're in a storytelling phase. So now IP is in. IP. Pure. Let's milk this IP as much. Let's create like experiences and stores and clothes and like now it's again for the masses. It's theme park.
Well, because like the sort of like daisy chaining of value. You have a toy that you got really good pop on because you associated it with the right celebrity at some point in the life cycle of the product. It got a bump. You realize it got a bump, so you kept making limited edition collectibles for it, because that's what fuels collector culture. Is I got the one that has yellow and green colorways versus it's very similar to like sneaker culture. But eventually that's going to run out because there's only so many different versions that a person can collect and still feel that there's value in collecting stuff or getting the rare version of something. And so then, to your point, you daisy chain that to narrative. So now we have all of these different versions and different expressions. What's the narrative that's holding it all together that actually makes this thing interesting beyond its aesthetics and brand codes? And then from that narrative, and maybe with the narrative, I imagine you can start doing things like building a brand world. So you move kind of like into entertainment from just the collectibles. So there's narrative stories, and then you move into brand worlds. And that's when you get into like a Hello Kitty type of thing where it's like clothes and makeup and restaurants and all of this type of stuff to live in the world that dramatizes the narrative that's been created around it. But I find that really interesting, going from like aesthetic-driven collectibles to entertainment IP narrative to brand world, which just gives you that full permission to move in lots of different categories.
I think it's all part of the IP, but you just have product, service, experience, story. That's kind of like you start with a product, then you have a service, which means how you connect those, like you maybe have a fandom or social network or something. Then you have an experience, which is your theme park or a store, and then you have a story at the center of all of that that's keeping it together.
So what's the service layer, though, within Labubu?
I think the service layer is like what is happening, with TikTok, with unboxing, with people swapping, like those fan groups that are swapping different Labubus. Imagine a service who is going like rebuying, reselling.
Oh, so that's not like a third party that's coming in and doing that. That's Pop Mart facilitating that?
No, people buying and selling themselves. eBay, go to eBay and see, like buy yourself a Labubu, but just be careful because there are a lot of like fake Labubus out there.
Yeah, the Lafufus. apparently they have 11 teeth and a real Labubu has 7 teeth or something like that.
Well, you need to be careful where the feet and ears, which brings us to bootleg Gucci, which is more popular than real Gucci. Because, like creativity, what I think is that now, because how like when IP starts to dominate, it's all financialization of culture. Which means what worked in the past is going to work in the future. That's why we have 25 Zumas.
That's why we have the same movie franchises being done and redone.
24 Carbones, or 12 Carbones, 12 Carbones. I stand corrected. I don't know, 24 something else, like million Nobus and so on. Exactly. That's why we have 17 Fast and Furious and, so, and in fashion, you have a lot of stuff like, oh, this worked in the past, let's do it again in the future. But like bootleggers, let's go crazy. Like we can.
Well, so to
DNA.
Yeah, so to that point, so let's onboard everyone to this third and final segment with the podcast. So this one's all about bootleg Gucci. So once considered the shameful shadow of luxury, bootleg Gucci is suddenly fashion's hottest flex. Unauthorized remixes from the 80s and 90s are commanding thousands on resale platforms, with TikTok creators and influencers flaunting ironic logos as signals of cultural savvy. Searches for bootleg designer are up 70%, and Gucci knockoffs lead the pack. So what's the twist? Well, Gucci itself is slipping. Parent company Kering reported a 21% sales drop last quarter, even as competitors like Dior and LVMH posted modest gains. In a strange turn of events, Gucci's most desirable pieces this season are the ones it did not make. So this is the topic that I've been excited to get into because it is so counterintuitive. So make it make sense for us.
Well, first of all, let's wait until Demna comes and starts making luxury pieces for Gucci. So, if you wanted something bootleg, that's it. Because you know what? What he did for Balenciaga, you can find it on Canal Street for like, I don't know, $10. So, you know what I think? I think that's exactly what we talked about for Ralph Lauren. Again, bootleggers, they take the source code and they just riff off it. In a way, they are not constrained by merchandisers' Excel spreadsheets. They're not constrained by P&L. They're not constrained by basically revenue and profit expectations. So what they do, they have good enough materials. Often those materials come from same factories, similar factories, and they say, hey, what would it be? They're not going to create exactly the same thing. Some of them, that's not bootlegging. Those are knockoffs, and knockoffs like pretend to be originals. Bootlegging is, again, taking different pieces of brand DNA and putting it together. And the point is, now that luxury is so ubiquitous, that is so accessible, that is so expensive, that everyone is like, what am I really buying here? Am I really buying Rhode tights for $7,000? What is really that I'm buying here? I might as well buy something that I really like, that's a meta creative, that has all the codes of those logos. And that is not pricey because I'm then showing my taste, my cultural capital. I'm plugged in with some no-name designer, bootlegger, who has probably bigger street cred than some designer who is like paid gazillions of dollars. Like Dapper Dan is way more impressive personality than anyone.
Yeah, well, I think to your point, like, what am I buying? I think Vetements years ago really pushed that to the extreme, and it was just like, why am I paying this markup for stuff? But I think the part that you made at the beginning of your argument, I thought was really interesting, is that a lot of these bootleggers can get quality materials for, good enough for everyday use. It's not going to be the best stuff in the world, but it's going to be higher quality. And they don't have entire teams and business functions sitting on top of them, making sure you're creating a line or collection that's going to sell. They're going to do short, small runs of stuff that's really interesting and maybe even pushes the boundaries a little bit or plays with the edges of the brand or the expectations and stuff. And so there's sort of like a bottoms up creative directorship around it. And like at the end of the day, if like the logo carries symbolic capital with it, symbolic value with it, and for many people that's why you buy the product, then that can be remixed and done in really interesting ways from the bootleggers. And so it offers fundamentally the same value, whether you buy it from the bootlegger or you buy it from the brand itself. It's just that the bootlegger is a bit more unconstrained in what they're doing with the brand.
That's it, because no one is going to mistake a bootlegged item with the brand item. When you have a knockoff, you're trying to pass as someone who actually paid $10,000 for something. With bootleg, you're not. You're saying, hey, I'm confident enough to wear something that's bootleg. And by the way, I'm actually signaling my identity, my cultural capital, my social capital by wearing this. This is the creativity that I'm specifically buying. I'm not hiding behind something that I cannot afford.
Well, so there's like an interesting parallel here, and bear with me as I build this bridge. But there's a really interesting parallel in corporate R&D and bootleggers. So here's what I mean by that. So I've seen data and longitudinal analyses of corporate R&D spend over the decades. I mean, going all the way back to like the early 1900s, where a lot of that R&D spend used to be internal. And then what you see over time is more of that R&D spend is pushed into the market, where startups are absorbing the risk. They're the ones being responsible for finding the capital and creating a velocity and a path to proof of value as quickly as possible. And then the larger corporations, as we know in our common day today, are really just doing M&A of like buying all of these people. You see it in CPG, you see it in tech. But all that innovation has been really pushed to the market because what corporations are always trying to do is you're always trying to remove risk from the system that you operate because you want more consistency, you want more certainty. So let's push risk out. Let's create more efficiency in capital spend. So we're only putting capital towards the things that we know work, which is why we get these recursive cycles of fashion and recursive cycles of IP. But all of that's being pushed to the market. So if you actually look at the bootleggers in relation to the fashion brands, that's effectively kind of what's happening, where you let the bootleggers, again, not knockoffs, but you let the bootleggers do the R&D of pushing the boundaries of what's possible with your brand. And then I don't know that the luxury labels are doing this, but like almost like looking at that as they're doing really interesting boundary pushing, high risk, short run R&D out in the past. How do you take that and pull it in? And that's sort of why I mentioned the Gucci thing earlier with Dapper Dan is, yes, it was basically just like a campaign where they acknowledged it and the history of it and stuff like that. But what happens if you go beyond just making people aware of it and saying, hey, we understand the lineage that we're a part of, and actually look at those bootleggers as effectively startups in aesthetic, startups in finding new boundaries for your brand, and then pull them into a collaboration, an acquisition per se, with the fashion house?
I think we need more of bootleggers, although they're illegals.
Well, everything's illegal until someone says it's not.
Absolutely. Just look at porn. We wouldn't have any media tech innovation without it. Okay, I think that porn is a perfect way to end this episode. So the key takeaway for me is that bootleggers, Burberry, they just keep at it. They just keep at it. There is no such thing as one-off campaigns, the former model of media. There is only an ongoing cultural product, cultural program. Their cultural products are connected in a way so they amplify one another. So when Olivia Colman came in with her fish and chips, we knew exactly what she's building upon it, because before that there was a fashion show with, music, and before that there were music festivals, and then before that was a previous fashion show with Burberry Weather and Trench as a main character and so on. So like one thing, the program is very tight, very consistent. Just keep going.
Just kind of recapping things. So the through line for me today and much of the conversation is really the movement from a singular focus to a portfolio approach to stuff. Whether you're Ralph Lauren blowing out your world into lots of different ways, Labubu trying to find different ways to manifest something as simple as like a fuzzy doll, or Burberry trying to embrace lots of different subcultures in British music. That portfolio approach and taking that approach to figure out how to engage with and resonate with culture is a really powerful idea that it's non-linear, it's messy, but that framework of a portfolio management is something that can give people a framework for doing this in a way that a traditional linear campaign isn't an appropriate framework for that. So for me, that's what really stood out.
I love that, and more of all of that to come. And that reminds me of, again, what we said, that like subculture is not a target audience, it's your creative partner.
You got to contribute to it.
Dapper Dan and all the others.
Okay, so let's talk about next episode. So on episode 2 of season 2 of Hitmakers is going to be about something a little different. We're going to explore why the old adage that every business is show business is more true than ever. That's next time on Hitmakers. Thanks, Anna.
Thanks, Lee.